Seeing a movie is like stepping into a world apart from your own. Movies have a distinct ability to suck an audience in and make them believe every word and action on screen as if it were reality. This can make people cheer, laugh, cry, and in the case of horror films, even scream. Horror films are meant to induce an almost primal feeling of unease within an audience, and leave them with a chilling sting down their spine as they walk out of the theater. But the way they have done this has changed throughout the years. While all movies hold cultural significance, horror movies so often lean into the culture of the time to find said significance, to comment on, refer to, or otherwise critique it. The fears of any given society are ammunition for the screams of horror, and these fears will often reel in audiences by the masses. More often than not, this is because audiences prefer to experience these anxieties and fears in the movies rather than in real life. In the movies, these problems and worries reach an inevitable conclusion, and though they might not always be positive, they still find an end. In Roman Polanski's 1968 hit film debut, Rosemary's Baby, such societal fears are aptly exploited. The film revolves around Mia Farrow's Rosemary Woodhouse as she lives out a hellish nightmare in which it seems everyone around her, even her own husband, are plotting against her for nefarious, satanic purposes.
Rosemary, go back to bed. You know you're not supposed to be up and around.
Is the mother? Rosemary.
Shut up.
Rosemary.
Shut up, you're in Dubrovnik. I don't hear you.
And while this film concerns heavily with the concept of birthing the spawn of Satan, the real societal impact of this film comes from the messages it holds about the corrupt world of the 1960s. The 60s were a time lacking conventional morality, which was thought to be a response of the Vietnam War and the John F. Kennedy assassination 2 years prior. People began questioning organized religion, while baby boomers, or Rosemary's generation, were at the forefront of that skepticism. Times Magazine captures this religious questioning in their 1966 issue titled, "Is God Dead?", which Rosemary is even seen reading in the movie. Many Americans were slowly but surely beginning to lose faith and devoutness toward their Christian beliefs. So much so, in fact, that Satanism, an ideological following of the devil, rose in popularity. The Church of Satan was founded in 1966, which is precisely when the film takes place, simply showing the dramatized hypocrisy of simply replacing one organized religion with another.
What have you done to him, you maniac?
Satan is his father, not Guy. He came up from hell and begat a son of mortal woman. Hail, Satan!
Hail, Satan!
All those in the film who worshiped the devil were painted as the antagonists of the film, yet they had a stronger presence than that of Catholicism, certainly stronger than ever before. Their very existence in the film suggests their prominence in the mainstream culture of that time. Additionally, throughout the movie, Rosemary is met with backhanded and uncaring retorts that everything she believes to be true, many of which is in fact true, is all in her head.
Come to my office tomorrow after 5.
No, right now.
Mrs. Woodhouse, I'm not at my office now. I'm home. I've been up since yesterday morning.
I beg you. I beg you. I can't stay here.
She goes through psychological trauma at the hands of the men in her life, insisting that she is wrong through the Freudian belief of female hysteria. Not only is this a world-renowned fear of losing one's own mind and sanity, but also an appropriate noting of the lack of control women had over their own body and mind throughout the general consensus that women should be submissive to their husband. Rosemary is even raped by her husband, and in many ways forced to keep and birth this child which she knows stems from some sort of evil. Nonetheless, no one listens to or understands her. The glaring problem of a woman's role and voice in society at that time, even then being all too clear, it was the idea of not having any choices at all. This lack of independence jump-started many women's rights movements in the late 1960s, promoting gender equality as a necessity. Rosemary's Baby had such a large impact on society that it managed to inspire a subgenre of horror films to come, which would follow these demonic storylines with a psychological basis to them, as will our next two films in their own ways. In 1978, John Carpenter released his hit horror film Halloween, starring Jamie Lee Curtis as the protagonist, Laurie Strode. This film, one of the first hit slasher flicks of the subgenre, takes place in a small town in Illinois where a psychotic, borderline mentally ill murderer rampages through the town on Halloween, searching for his next victims. Whereas the 60s saw a rise in the unconventional and a breakaway from typical societal pillars, the 1970s now saw a distinct lack of morality unfold. Infamously, the 1970s were filled with murders and tragedy at the hands of a number of serial killers. The Manson family, the Zodiac Killer, John Wayne Gacy, Ted Bundy, Jim Jones, just some of the notorious killers of the 70s, still regarded as many of the most infamous in history. Even now, films are being made about and around these people and their exploits. However, in the later half of the decade, Carpenter brought this chilling film to light, shocking and disturbing audiences to their core. The concept of serial killers is in itself scary enough, but when this fear is personified by someone at the polar end of the spectrum, that is, someone without any moral quandaries or issues overtaking lives, it pokes right at the center of society's fear at the time. Michael Myers could be anyone. Just as Ted Bundy, Charles Manson, and the Zodiac Killer could have been anyone. People you could pass on the street and be none the wiser. It made people fear their neighbors, question who the people they thought they really knew were. Morality was suddenly thrown into the air, and no one knew who would catch it and who would let it fall. Michael Myers chose to bury it underneath him and ruthlessly go after Laurie Strode without her knowledge, which is exactly what the American people were afraid of at that time.
Was the boogeyman?
As a matter of fact, it was.
Sometime after that, horror seemed to dip in quality, and while on occasion it still held meaning and impact, this was soon replaced for cheap scares and disturbing imagery. Horror lost its scary appeal and societal impact, and instead became a place for a quick thrill, a gauntlet to run, to see if you could manage the gore, jump scares, and cliches. However, in recent years, this trend has begun to die out as cultural significance makes a return. In Jordan Peele's 2017 horror film Get Out, the glaring societal issues being addressed are almost too obvious. Not enough to take away from the quality of the movie, however. The racial tension within the United States, especially after the shooting of Trayvon Martin in 2012, has only seemed to increase the division of ethnic groups leading up to even now.
Get out.
Sorry, man.
Okay. Get out!
Yo!
No!
Yo, chill, man.
Get out!
Chill,
Chill, man!
As director Jordan Peele has explained, this film very accurately displays and portrays the kind of life and fear that African American people have to go through in this country. The feeling of unease that a black man has walking through a white suburb at night is real, and this film shows that. The kind of danger and violence that racism can produce in something that in the last several years the country has seen all too clearly, and yet it continues, and that scares people.
Do you realize how dangerous smoking is?
Yeah.
Come in and sit with me, please. Just for a little while. Please.
Granted, Peele explains this is not a film demonizing all white people, but rather the idea of racism. It is a natural feeling and reaction of human beings to prejudge others, and especially in recent history, this can and has led to dangerous, perhaps even violent results. It's a problem in many of society's members that needs to be addressed and changed, and Peele does this through the extreme of a psychotic, hypnotic, and seemingly demonic family, and the plight the main character, Chris, played by Daniel Kaluuya, must face. It's a return to form for horror movies, and proof that they are much more than a cheap thrill for a night out. Horror films are a means of exploiting the fear of the people, and asking what can be done about it. It forces the audience to sit back and watch these fears played out, to experience them as they may never have before. It begs the question, what are you afraid of? And the answer lies somewhere in our society and in ourselves.
No. Be afraid. Be very afraid.